So, let's face it, you're a bit of a kook, and one day while you're playing in the whitewash, you ride your fin into the sand and you bust your fin plug. At Small Kind Ding Repairs, we understand that we've all been there and we laugh with you, not at you. Like our slogan says, you kook it, we fix it. The people we do laugh at, we lovingly refer to as Uncle Tonys.
It's too bad they don't have a telethon for fuckface-itis, huh?
Do you have an Uncle Tony near you? Maybe he lives on the end of your street, or maybe he's your mate's dad, a friend of a co-worker, maybe he's your mate. Uncle Tonys will say things like, "Oh mate, I was a boat builder for about 3 days back in the 1960s. I can definitely fix the broken fin box in your surfboard. No worries, I'll do it for a carton of piss." After about 6 weeks and a cheap box of beer, you'll get your surfboard back looking like it's played a lead role in the movie Saving Private Ryan. After your first surf back in the water, if you're lucky enough not to slice yourself open on his razor-sharp repair job that he just didn't have time to sand, you'll have a board that's full of water again, and a fin that's flapping around in the wind like the loose skin of a Biggest Loser contestant. So let's see how a real ding repairer replaces an FCS fin plug. First thing we're going to do, of course, is take the broken fin plug out of the board, and we want to do this slowly and carefully, so as not to break or delaminate the fiberglass around the fin plug. Now that our fin plug is successfully removed, we need to replace the foam in the board before we reinstall the plug. We are not going to fill this hole with resin and just sink a plug straight into it. This is a 2-part PU expanding foam. You might not have this type of foam, that's fine. Chop up an old surfboard or use the foam that your computer was packed in when you bought it. The only downside to this technique is you may need to make your ding a little bigger to make it into a rectangle or a square, a shape that you can easily replicate with your spare foam. Do the same with the depth as well. You don't want uneven depth, so using a router or a knife, a chisel, make sure it's the same depth throughout the whole ding so your foam plug sits nice and flat on the area you're filling. I will do a video on these foams down the track if you're interested in that kind of thing. It's definitely on my list of topics to cover. But back to it, so we're going to cut the head off of this sucker, get it as close to the board as possible, because the less sanding the more better. And we're going to sand it nice and flat, getting it even with the board. These plugs are designed to be installed post-lamination, so that's exactly the stage we're trying to get back to. We're going to go with 2 patches over this ding. One of them is going to be 2 ounce, that's going to be the larger of the 2 patches, and one of them is going to be 4 ounce, that's the smaller of the 2 patches. That's going to give us a total of 6 ounces of cloth over the top of the ding, but we're only putting 2 ounces worth of cloth over the existing fiberglass, because it really doesn't need extra fiberglass. If that all sounded really complicated, cut some fiberglass and put it over the ding. Our smaller patch is going to go down first, and our larger patch is going to go over the top of it. This is to ensure that if there's any type of failure down the track, if this small patch here decides to let go for whatever reason, we're going to have a larger patch on top of it holding it in place, and our ding is going to stay stronger for longer. Being epoxy, we now need to sand it. We're just trying to feather the edges out, and we're sanding around the area so that we've got some room for our resin to go down next. We really only want to scuff the cloth that sits directly above our ding. We don't want to sand it away, because otherwise there wasn't much point in putting it down to begin with. So we've masked off our area. I've masked pretty close to the rail, so resin has a place to run off without pouring on the other side of the board. I've masked off the other plug. Some people won't mask before their hot coats. That's fine. I prefer to. Totally up to you. Just get some resin on it and onto the next step. Just be wary if you choose my method when you're demasking. Just make sure you don't lift any resin as you're demasking. It's fine to leave some tape behind. You can always sand it away if it's got some extra built up resin on top. Sanding, yet again, always a lot of sanding with these jobs. We're bringing the edges down, bringing our resin down nice and flat, getting ready to install our plug. So with that all sanded, our board is fully laminated and we're ready to install our FCS plug post-lamination as intended. If you don't have one of these FCS plug templates, I don't know what to tell you. It's going to be a bit of measuring for you. It's all doable, but yeah, you can always bring your board into me and pay me to do it instead. Little pre-drill in the center of our drawing here. Now we get to talk about the exciting subject of hole saws. If we go back to the plug that we pulled out, you can see in this video that the resin on the side of the plug here is really, really thin. Too thin, some might say, and if the resin were a little bit thicker, it's possible that this plug wouldn't actually have been able to split into two pieces. This is the FCS hole saw bit. It's designed to install not only fin plugs but leash plugs as well, and so it does have a depth adjuster so that we can adjust our depths depending on what we're installing. Most importantly though, it's quite wide in comparison to the fin plug or the leash plug itself. Compare our FCS plug here with the plug that we've just removed, and you can see there's a good border of resin around the plug itself. It's also designed to work in unison with this tool, which cuts an H pattern into our installation, linking our resin from the plug to the deck of the board. Although we won't be using this tool on this job, as the original plugs didn't use this technique. So using our hole saw bit, we're going to begin our cut. We want to go slowly into the fiberglass. We don't want to be pushing down on the drill, just allowing the blades to slowly cut away at the glass. And once we get through that glass, it'll drive itself into the foam, so you really don't need to apply much pressure. And then using a flathead screwdriver, we're just going to go around and slowly pry that foam, just bending it and moving it until we eventually snap the only connecting point at the bottom. We're now going to test fit the plug in its new home with a dummy fin. Make sure everything lines up, and then we're going to check our cant angle on the two original plugs and make sure that we can achieve that same angle installing our new plug. Because we're not doing the H pattern in this particular install, I'm going to cut up a bunch of fiberglass offcuts and we're going to drop them into the hole just for a little bit of reinforcement, seeing as the plug isn't tied to the deck in the way it should be by design. So we're ready to go. We've mixed some resin with some micro balloons. The only reason I've mixed with micro balloons in this case is to match the resin of the existing plugs, but otherwise I probably wouldn't bother. And then using our dummy fin, we're going to put everything into place. Now that everything is where it should be, we're going to check the angle again. Because we did this before the install, I know that our fin needs to lean in slightly. So using some masking tape to tie our fin to the fin on the other side of the board, we can achieve this.
The next day.
Being epoxy, it's been left overnight and this is the next day. We're going to take the masking tape off and get ready to sand it. Don't forget to wind your grub screws all the way into the plug before you start sanding. It's a surefire way to destroy your sander. Now is a good time to double check your cant angle, make sure it's perfect. So I sanded the plug down with 240 grit and sanded around it with 240 to remove all of our 120 scratches from all the work prior. This clip here I'm sanding with 320 to get rid of all those 240 scratches before sanding with 400 wet, and possibly I went 600 wet with this one, but you can go as far as you like. And once we've done the wet sand, we're gonna get the buff onto it, polish it all up and blend it into the rest of the board, and we're good to go. You've just replaced an FCS1 plug. So now you know how to do it properly. You've got no excuses to be filling giant cavities with resin when you're fixing these plugs. Always repair your boards with foam. And as a final note, these videos take bloody ages. So if you want to subscribe, it would be much appreciated. Cheerio!